Hey everyone, welcome to the Core Connections Podcast, a show dedicated to bringing you cutting-edge ideas, research, and solutions for all things health, fitness, and wellness related. If you're a first-time listener, hello and welcome. I'm Erica Zeal. I tackle controversial subjects, challenge the status quo, and bring on experts to discuss topics that aren't talked about enough in women's health. Okay, let's go ahead and start talking about intermittent fasting. And so this is like kind of a buzzword, right? What is intermittent fasting? Many of us kind of know what it is, but should we do it? Some of us might kind of do it. Some of us might be scared of doing it, right? Some of you may be doing it and you're like, it's the greatest thing I've ever done, right? So basically, intermittent fasting is really just trying to, increase the time between when you, say eat in the evening to when you eat in the morning to give your digestive system a break from having to constantly digest food, right? We can get in this cycle of, the old thinking, and I was originally taught this way, but I have since really dramatically shifted and kind of done a 180 because, way back even in college when I studied dietetics even, it was about, eating every 2 to 3 hours. We got to keep our metabolism up, blah, 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 right? But what we're doing when we're doing that is we're actually stressing out our body in a big way because we're actually asking our GI tract to never take a break. It's eating, digesting. And so when we do that all the time, every time we eat, it creates a little bit of inflammation because our gut has to work to break down our food, right? And obviously that we have to eat, right? We have to nourish and fuel our body. Absolutely. And that's how we should be looking at our food. But at the same time, there's more and more amazing research coming out about the power of intermittent fasting. I'm going to share some incredible information with you all today. And the biggest takeaway with this, before we really get going, is I just want to remind all of you, I'm a big fan of really listening to your body, eating intuitively. If you're going to do intermittent fasting, really doing it a little bit more intuitively, right? It doesn't have to be in a box per se, especially women who are still having cycles, because it's going to ebb and flow throughout the month. There might be 2 weeks of your month where you're like, I feel like I can totally do intermittent fasting. And then there might be days or the 2 other weeks where you're just like, I can't go that long without eating food, right? And it's going to ebb and flow. And in the beginning, you may do it less, but as time goes, you start to recognize like, oh, wow, I do feel a little bit better. You start recognizing some of the benefits, which I'm going to share with you in just a minute. And so this is why I'm so big. And I'm always like, I think almost every episode, I'm like, listening to your body, but not just like listening, actually like listening to your body. And by that, I mean, are we taking action because of what our body is telling us, right? We have so many things kind of working against us today with this like toxic environment we live in. But there are so many things that we can do to counteract that. And this is one thing. And I personally do exactly what I'm sharing with you. I do some intermittent fasting, which I'll talk more about, but I do it in a way that doesn't have judgment with it. And by that, I mean, it doesn't have to be perfect. Some days I absolutely can make it a lot longer, like say till like lunch before I eat my first meal of the day. Other days I wake up and I'm like, I am starving and wow, I got a lot to do today. I really just need to eat. And other days I'm like, I may have as much to do and on my plate, but I'm like, I feel good and I'm going to go longer without eating. So that's really what I'm meaning by intuitively listening to your body, because even if you're like, I want to do intermittent fasting, it doesn't have to be something that you do every single day. For some, I know once they get the ball rolling on it, it is something that is like their body feels and they feel so amazing that they do end up doing it on a daily basis. But again, especially for women, I find that there's a lot more variables out there. So I'm just really big I want to give you permission if you need that. It's not about perfection here. Okay. So I want to talk about some of the benefits right away, because I think if you need some motivating reasons of why to like at least give this a try. And I'm going to talk about how to give it a try if you haven't before, because you've kind of been like, I don't know, I can't go that long without eating kind of thing. It's okay. You're not alone, I promise you. So some of the benefits can be weight loss. So if maybe you've been trying to lose weight, and I don't talk about weight loss a lot because I really like to fixate more on the health aspect, but we also know, being of a healthy weight also can be good for our health. So that can naturally happen. By intermittent fasting, you can increase your energy and your mood. And part of that mood comes from, it can increase our serotonin levels. And I'm going to talk more about that with our sleep-wake cycles. So I want to weave that in today as well, because that also plays a role with our intermittent fasting. Is being on a schedule in a sense, although I don't love that word, but essentially that's kind of what we need to be doing, kind of going to bed at a similar time every night, waking up at a similar time every morning, and then being aware of how much time we're eating our food, basically, to having our body eat, digest, and then rest. This is one of my favorites, is increasing your GI motility, which means if you've ever dealt or are currently dealing with constipation, this is a really, really, really big right here, because if we're not constantly, but if we're not allowing enough time in between meals and in between foods, this is why I've also changed over these many years of minimizing snacking, and not that you can't ever snack, but on a regular basis, kind of getting out of that habit. Because if we eat and then our body is digesting and then we don't allow enough time to allow GI motility, which is when our gut works to our intestines push things through, and we have to go right back to we eat and digest again. If there isn't enough time in between that, then that's where sometimes constipation can come from. There's other factors, of course, but I think a really big one that can come from the intermittent fasting is to help improve constipation because of that GI motility. And the biggest thing too, understanding constipation does so much more for the body than just kind of leave you feeling like crap, literally, right? Is that it's a big part of your detoxification. So if we are not having regular bowel movements, minimum of once a day, preferably 2 to 3 times a day. That's really more ideal, especially if you're eating 2 or 3 meals a day. If you're only eating 1 meal a day, then you may only go once, right? But it's a big part in helping to improve our detoxification, not only of just toxins and heavy metals and all of that, but also our hormones. So if you tend to be a little bit more estrogen dominant, which is say you're having really heavy clotty periods, that's just one kind of telltale sign that you've got excess estrogen in your body, or you're estrogen dominant as it's spoken of. And there's more, there's always more to it. Again, everything's always connected. I always go to the thing, I'm like, don't go off the beaten path too far, Erica, come back here. But I just want to mention it because I know hormones are hormones kind of get put in a little box on their own, but we have to recognize hormones are a response to other things going on in the body. And this is just one piece that can affect hormones. So if we're not having regular bowel movements and you have excess estrogen, well, you could actually be reabsorbing estrogen that actually was meant to leave your body. Okay, I won't say any more about it, but we can have more conversation about that at a later date. It can improve our insulin sensitivity. This is big. This is so big, right? Because our insulin is really important. We don't want to have high insulin, right? Because then that means you're pre-diabetic. And diabetes is one of those it's preventable. And if you're listening, someone who's been diagnosed with diabetes, the sooner you catch it and you start to change and do these lifestyle changes, you can reverse it as well. But obviously we want to do as much as we can to prevent it. We can improve our gut microbiome diversity, which is really important. We want to have a diverse microbiome, right? Because it's going to help us to be healthier, right? It's also where it comes down to eating a variety of foods can be powerful in helping with that. So it can also help in protecting against diabetes, neurodegeneration, right? So this is where it definitely, our whole gut-brain connection comes into play. It can help with prevention of cancers, heart disease. Obviously, it can help reduce obesity, hypertension, asthma, even rheumatoid arthritis. It can help to increase our liver function. Again, back to my little mention of detoxification. Our liver is really the number one thing that people think about when you think of detoxification. We don't always think about the gut per se, and obviously there's other ways we do detoxify through sweating and things like that. But if our gut is backed up and we're constipated a lot, and our liver also is too, then that can explain some symptoms that you might be having. So this is why I just want to talk about the benefits so that you can start to do any of these things sound like, oh yeah, I could work to improve upon that again. So just, I like to find those health reasons of your whys, because those are usually tend to be a little bit bigger motivators to try something new. And the really, really big reason, which this is such an underlying reason as to why all of these things, is that intermittent fasting can really help to decrease inflammation in the body. And at the end of the day, inflammation is really kind of the root of so many things that go awry in the body. So I want to talk a little bit about the circadian rhythm and how it helps to regulate our GI function. And several weeks ago, we did an episode about sleep. So I would highly recommend listening to that if you haven't yet and you're interested in listening more about improving your quality of sleep. But I wanted to tie this together as I heard Dr. Gersh talk about this as well. And I was very fascinated by what she was saying, because I was like, this makes perfect sense, right? We know that our circadian rhythm plays a role in our overall health. Well, it also can play an overall role in our GI function as well. And so I want to talk a little bit about intermittent fasting and how it can look for you. And again, you can try different ways. I just want to start with what I feel is probably the most kind of common. And I want to start with our evening routine. I know some people talk about like having a morning routine, right? But I personally have found that if we focus on our evening routine, and I've done this with clients, that the morning routine comes easier, because if we don't have a good routine going to bed and our evening routine to get good quality sleep, and we're not getting very good quality sleep, then we wake up in the morning feeling sluggish and tired, and we wonder why we can't develop this good morning routine. Well, because we haven't got our evening routine figured out. So while everyone's talking about creating an awesome morning routine, which is amazing, I think that's great. And if you've done it, kudos to you, that's amazing. But most likely you have a good evening routine if you've done that. So if you're someone who's really trying to find that morning routine, or it's a struggle, let's look at our evening routine first. Let's start with about what time every night do you eat dinner? Okay, this is really important. Ideally, we shouldn't be eating a big meal right before bed, because then if we do that, we go to bed and our body should actually be repairing, and this also involves our brain as well, but it doesn't have that capability to do that if everything's going to our digestive tract to digest the food, that big meal that we just ate. Now, if you do that once in a while, right, it's not the end of the world. It is what it is, right? But on a regular basis, we need to be aware of, okay, let's try to eat our evening meal a little bit earlier in the evening. So maybe you eat at 6, or maybe even 7, or maybe even 8. 8 for a meal, a full evening meal, maybe pushing it a little bit, because unless you're going to bed like 10:30, 11, right? But so the little bit earlier you can eat to allow your body to have digested your food, so that when you go to bed, your body is really ready to go into repair mode. Right? Very important. And having that evening routine, which I won't go too much into now, but just a really quick overview of minimizing blue light, minimizing screens, finding that routine that helps you to wind down at night, maybe drinking some chamomile tea, like something like that can help tell your body like, oh, it's time for bed, like turning down the lights in your house and, just making your environment a little bit darker. So just some things to think about. But when we can start to figure out our evening routine, it will help you in the morning. So one other thing I want to mention while we're talking about evening is some of you might be thinking, oh, but Erica, I have to have a little snack before I go to bed. So I have 2 thoughts on that. Number 1, I'm going to encourage you to question your body as to, are you actually hungry? So are you eating out of habit? Or are you a little thirsty? What if you replace that with some chamomile tea or another tea that works for you, right? Whatever works for you. And see if that you're like, I wasn't really hungry. I was just eating because you're like, I don't even know why. And that's okay. Right? Again, remember, we're taking all the judgment out of this. This is how we find new magical things for our life, is when we take judgment out of it and we're like, let's just explore and let's just try something new and let's just see what happens. Now, the other reason is maybe you really do actually need some food. Because here's the thing, if you're not getting enough good quality carbohydrates with your evening meal, you may actually need more carbohydrates. So if you notice, like say in the past, you've been eating a snack before you go to bed and now you stop doing that and you're restless, you can't sleep very well. Well, then what I would say to look into is to making sure you're eating enough good quality carbohydrates with your evening dinner. You may need to up that a little bit more sweet potatoes, a little bit, just making sure you're getting enough good quality carbohydrates, right? And we want to pay attention to when we're done eating in the evening. Let's say, for example, you're done eating by 7 p.m. in the evening. And again, if occasionally you need a snack, fine. But I'm just talking on let's talk about this intermittent fasting. So then in the morning, let's say, you go to bed at 10, you get up at 6, so you're getting about 8 hours of sleep, which is really where everybody should be. Not getting less than 7 or 8 hours of sleep. And in the morning, instead of eating your breakfast, you want to just push it another hour or two. So if you're used to getting up and eating breakfast, then just try, listen to your body. Be like, are you really hungry in the morning, or could you push your breakfast a little bit longer? Ideally, trying to get to 13 hours of fasting, which means if you stop eating at 7 at night, then you only need to go till 8 a.m. the next morning. And if you can go a little longer, great. I know kind of the standard you hear is 16 hours. And I'm not going to say that's wrong. I'm just going to tell you what I know Dr. Gersh talks about with women in particular. She finds 13 hours seems to really where you start to get these incredible benefits. So I don't know if that helps encourage some of you that have been a little I don't know if I'm ever going to get to 16 hours of fasting. It's okay. So just try. And maybe you can get to 12 hours and you're fine. But to get to that 13th hour right now is just not happening for you. And that's okay, right? It's all about kind of experimenting with your body, listening to your body. And one day you might be like, I'm not hungry. I'm just going to see how long I can go before I'm time to eat. Okay. Or maybe you just purposely I'm just going to go an hour extra and then eat. And you can do that for several days, or maybe you only do that one day a week, right? You don't have to do intermittent fasting every day to see benefits. I know people that do, and they swear by it and they love it. And a lot of them end up at that 16 hours of fasting. So then basically they're eating 2 meals a day. They basically eat a lunch and a dinner. And then the second piece we want to be thinking about with fasting, intermittent fasting, is that time in between our meals, having about 4 hours so then we get that GI motility to happen, right? So avoiding that snacking. So think about with fasting, it's when you're doing intermittent fasting, it's not about eating less calories. I'm not a calorie counter, but just in reference so that you all understand, we're not even though say maybe you go from eating 3 meals a day to 2 meals a day, you're not just necessarily cutting calories, you're actually going to end up eating more calories at both of those meals. Ideally, lunchtime, that first meal you're going to eat at the day should be the bigger meal, right? We kind of have it all backwards where we tend to eat sometimes a bigger meal at dinner time. And so if you're going to eat more of a lunch, and maybe it's a late breakfast or an early lunch, and then you eat a dinner, right? Trying ideally, right? Doing the best you can doesn't always mean it's going to work this way. And it's okay if it doesn't. Again, just experiment, see what works for you. But having your lunch be the bigger meal of the day. Or if you're I'm a big breakfast person and I want to eat breakfast, and you could care less about dinner, although most of you listening have families and all that. So it's, that family dinner time. And you can eat 3 meals a day still. Even if you push your breakfast till 9 or 10 a.m. and then you eat a late lunch at 2, and then you have dinner at 6. That still gives you that about 4-ish hours in between your meals so that you can improve that GI motility, especially if constipation has been an issue for you. That was something I would recommend experimenting with your body. But again, just a reminder, you do not have to do this every single day to see benefits from it. right? So this is why I'm all about intuitively listening to your body and going with what your body says. So one morning you might wake up and you're like, I'm starving. There's no way I'm fasting. Then by all means, eat breakfast. Maybe, on a Saturday morning because, you have kids at home and you want to make a family breakfast, right? Like, don't opt out of eating that. If you're like, I just want to be part of the family and I don't want to skip that, then don't do it, right? You have the freedom to pick and choose what you do, but you might just find that the more that you practice this and try this, that you start to do it more often because you actually start to feel better. You actually sleep better. Your GI tract functions better, right? Like things like that, like your health starts to improve if some of these things I listed off are things that you are dealing with. So I just want to, I like to give ideas, right? And again, you take them and, even just picking one little thing from today's episode that you want to implement and try, right? And maybe again, you just start with 12 hours and you're like, and that's great. So I wanted to, before I get into this, I wanted to mention something about in the morning because the whole coffee conversation, right? So I do my mushroom coffee in the morning and I've heard different perspectives on this. And that's why this whole conversation, there's so many different perspectives on this. There's definitely research out there to show that there are true benefits from intermittent fasting. And obviously there's other fasts you can do, like basically they're fasting mimicking diets. So you still eat a little food and you fast. I'm not going to talk about that today. There's water fast. Like there's all those types of other fasts, which I'm not talking about today. I'm really just talking about that intermittent fasting where you're giving your more time from your nighttime meal to your morning or lunchtime meal, whatever it is, if you can go that long, right? So just to clarify, there's just different types of fasting out there. But in general, fasting is showing, the research out there is really showing to be incredible benefits. So I want to address the whole coffee in the morning. I know many of you are big coffee drinkers like me, and I love my mushroom coffee. And so I've heard different perspectives on this in order to keep yourself in that fasting state in the morning, you need to keep it under your coffee and whatever you add to your coffee under 100 calories. I've also heard under 50 calories. I know Dr. Gundry says that we should keep calories under 50 in that morning coffee. And also if you're, someone like me who loves our collagen protein powder, you cannot add that into your coffee in the morning or it'll kick you out of fasting. So here's what I do is my first coffee of the morning, I just add a little bit of like almond, I like really thick almond or cashew kind of creamer that I have. It has no fillers or anything in it. And I just add a little bit of that. And also keep in mind supplements, because some supplements do have some calories. Again, I'm not a big calorie counter, but it is something to be aware of if you're going to be fasting. So if you add stuff to your coffee, then you just want to make sure that you're adding, I always say steer on the lighter side, because if you're really wanting to do this for health benefits, and then say you have a later breakfast or even your lunch, and if you're someone who really wants to have that second cup of coffee, that's when I would add your collagen into it then. So just something to think about, be aware of. Okay, I want to talk specifically about adrenal dysfunction or adrenal fatigue and exhaustion, right? So we've talked a little bit about that before. That's a great episode if you're listening and you haven't listened to that before, where you've been diagnosed, quote, with adrenal fatigue, right? True adrenal fatigue is actually Addison's disease. We now know that adrenal fatigue dysfunction is really an HPA excess dysfunction, meaning it has to do more with the brain than your adrenals themselves. A very, very, very big, important thing to know. And it can really be more about our stress and inflammation in our body. So previously, I had always been told, okay, if you have adrenal fatigue or adrenal dysfunction, things like that, you should not be doing intermittent fasting. But I'm not sure about that. Okay, and here's why. I just want to share my perspective on this. And then for those of you that may be in this situation, I will let you make that decision, obviously. And of course, have a conversation with your doctor. And of course, you could always just experiment with your body and see how you feel. But knowing that our HPA axis dysfunction involves the brain, involves stress, involves inflammation. And we know that there's this correlation between how our gut functions and how our brain functions, that, if we tried some intermittent fasting, even if it was only one day a week that we made it 13 hours without eating overnight, and we saw a little decrease in our inflammation in our body and improvement in our gut motility, because that all kind of correlates back to brain function. And side note, you should be working to decrease your stress if you have adrenal dysfunction. Of course, side note, Addison's disease is different than, I'm not putting that in this category. But I just think it's been kind of a blanketed statement. So many women have been, quote, told like they have adrenal fatigue, right? Adrenal dysfunction, things like that. Again, more HPA axis dysfunction. So I have been someone who has, I think I was like 20 when I first was told I have adrenal fatigue, and even at one point adrenal exhaustion, which is really bad. And was still told that, I don't know, a couple years ago. And so I was always like, well, I don't know if I should do intermittent fasting and things like that. And you know what? From my personal experience, I have tried intermittent fasting, and I do it today. Now, I do it without judgment. I don't do it in a box. I try to do it so that I really listen to my body. And those days before my cycle's going to start, I can tell you, I do not intermittent fast. I'm like, nope, this body needs food, and I sure as heck am going to feed it. Now, I do try to allow time in between my meals, right? I try to do that on a regular basis. I try to minimize snacking, right? Notice, try. I'm not perfect at it, and I don't expect any one of you to be either. But I will tell you, and this is again my personal experience, everybody's bodies are different, but in correlation with working on improving sleep and paying more attention to allowing more time in between meals, as well as seeing, how long I can go in the morning some days without needing to eat. Some days, actually today, I made it all the way till it was almost 1:00, and I felt great. I felt amazing. But there's other days it's by 10:00, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm starving. I need to eat. I'm not really starving, but I'm like, I'm pretty hungry. It's time for me to eat. So I'm going to listen to my body, and I'm going to eat. That's kind of a little bit more of my average, I would say. And then there's some mornings where I'm like, I need to eat first thing in the morning. So I just want to share that because I know, having been someone who's dealt with adrenal, quote, dysfunction, knowing now it's more HPA dysfunction, we need to work on sleep and decreasing stress, and obviously inflammation in the body, right? So I just want you to think of those things and, experiment and see what works for your body. And you may only be able to do it one day, and maybe you only do 12 hours. And the next time you try it, maybe you do 12 hours and 30 minutes, and then you just slowly try it, and slowly start to try maybe eating less often, the snacking. Because I think that's been a big thing that's been taught to those of us that have had adrenal dysfunction. Oh my gosh, you should never go more than 2 hours without eating, honey. You are going to your blood sugar is going to drop, right? Yeah, that's a load of crap, because our insulin response actually, everything improves when we actually don't feed our body so often. Mind blowing from what I learned, 15 plus years ago in college, right? It's all changed, but that's okay. That's why we have to be open to learning new things, because things change, things shift, and new information becomes about, and it can change our life. So I want to also talk about, for any of those of you that are breastfeeding that may be listening and be like, yeah, this would be great to do, but I'm breastfeeding. I don't know if I can do intermittent fasting, because you need to eat so much food. So again, with breastfeeding, I would definitely run it by your doctor, but something that you could do is, again, just listen to your body. Maybe one day a week, you feel fine going, that 13 hours, but make sure you're getting enough food at your meals. Maybe try to just, instead of having 2 snacks a day, you only have 1 snack a day, right? So just having maybe between your lunch and dinner, you're able to go that whole time, which means maybe your lunch has to be a little bit bigger, right? And again, I know this is backwards from how a lot of us were taught a long, long time ago. That's okay. It's okay. Just try it. See how you feel. And then, of course, I know many of you, I have a lot of pregnant moms listening. So the same thing I would say kind of to a breastfeeding mom, of course, because you're pregnant, would I recommend intermittent fasting? No, because you need that nourishment. But if you are dealing with, say, some constipation, and of course, if you're not at the very end of your pregnancy, because then it's hard to eat a lot of food. That's the hardest thing with pregnancy, just run out of space. The one thing that I would recommend, if it feels okay for you, is to just, again, like I would say to a breastfeeding mom, maybe you try to have a 4-hour block in between a lunch and a dinner, as long as you feel fine, right? So, but again, keeping in mind, like those are short periods of time. Okay, so I just wanted to make a mention that if more than anything, I think just having a little more time if you're dealing with that constipation, and then after you're done breastfeeding, then that's when it would be a good time to then be like, okay, I'm going to try some intermittent fasting, because it could possibly really help you get back to where you want to go. Because again, not to get off topic, but pregnancy and can bring about some health things. And so this is where intermittent fasting could, I think, play a powerful role once you are completely done breastfeeding. Thank you so much for tuning in with me today. If you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to reach out to me on Instagram at Erica Zeal, and I would be so grateful if you would share this episode with your friends. The material contained within is provided for educational and informational purposes only and is not intended as medical advice. You should seek medical care for any specific health issues and consult your physician before beginning a new regimen or purchasing any products.